and the gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the world. It's the same idea. Now, this is what Luke says. Verse 20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know its desolation has come. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are inside the city depart. Let not those who are in the country enter. For these are the days of vengeance to fulfill what is written. Alas for those who are with child, those who are nursing. You get the idea? Didn't it sound the same as chapter 24? Mm-hmm. What's different?
The armies.
The armies. He says when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, that's when you should run. What did Matthew say? When you see the abomination that causes desolation. That's the interpretation. That's the key. See, Jews would understand when Daniel prophesied that, he was prophesying about how the Greeks came in and profaned the temple. You remember that? Remember how they set up a statue to Zeus and they started sacrificing pigs and they had orgies in the courtyard and things like that? They profaned it. That was an abomination that caused its desolation. You see that? So it's when the pagan armies come in to the Holy Land, to the holy city, to the temple, and profane it. Luke gives us that interpretation because we as non-Jews would not understand that significance. Luke tells us, as non-Jews, this is the sign to tell you to run when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. And who is he referring to? The Roman armies. Titus and his invading force. When you see that, get out of Dodge. And that's exactly what the Christians did. When the Romans came in the spring of 67 AD, and lay siege to Jerusalem for 3.5 years, they were out. The Jews didn't go. They didn't heed our Lord's warning. See that? So that is the abomination that causes desolation. In the immediate context of the Gospels, is that it is the invading armies of Jerusalem by the Romans. Is there yet a future fulfillment? Yes. Because when you read about the Antichrist in Daniel and in later Revelation, he talks about setting himself up as God in God's temple. So there will be a future fulfillment of this blasphemous work that identifies him. This is why in the 40s you couldn't say Hitler was the Antichrist. Because he never did anything like that. He may have been a megalomaniac, but one thing he didn't do was proclaim himself God to be worshipped. Okay? Nero did. That's why I think a real understanding, a real insight into the coming of the Antichrist, the capital A one, the one at the end of time, is going to mimic more of what ancient Roman emperors were like than any other monarch in recent history that we can think of. Hitler, Stalin, none of those people proclaimed themselves to be God or asked to be worshipped. In the same way that that Nero and the Caesars of Rome did. That's what the Antichrist is going to do when he comes. He's going to demand worship, and people will give it to him. Okay? So that's why we can have dictators up and down, Kim Jong-un or whatever, and all that. They're nobodies. They're nobodies in comparison to the big boy A that's coming. Okay? Marie.
Chip, so from 24, verse 24 to the end, what does this mean?
In Luke or in Matthew?
In Luke.
In Luke, they will fall by the edge of the sword, be led captive by all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Means that they will be under domination by Gentiles until the Gentile times are fulfilled. The times of the Gentiles are what we're living in right now. It's what we commonly would call the church age. When the church age comes to a close, that's when the end will come.
So does he tell us, do we have any hints when the church age
Yes.
will come to a close?
When the fulfillment of the number of Gentiles comes in, then the end will come. When is that, or how many is that? Only God knows. But this is the mystery that Paul talked about in Romans 11. We're going to talk a little bit about that if we get to chapter 7.
I just have a question.
Seth reminded me we passed 10 minutes. Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, just, as you see through the Bible, every time there's like a mass killing of the Jews, like Babylon coming, and they exile. And now the prediction of Roman sack Jerusalem, 1.5 million Jews died.
Yes.
Now, if we go back to World War II,
Yes.
what kind of sin that they committed that Hitler killed them that much? I mean, more than 1 million Jews have been killed in World
There's
War
no direct sin that caused that.
Right.
But I will say this, as the result of the Holocaust, what did the Jews gain? Their homeland back. After almost 2,000 years of being dispersed among the nations, after one of the greatest atrocities against the Jewish people, what happened afterwards? They founded their own nation. It's the only nation on earth that had died and has been reborn. Israel is such a sign for the world. And I don't want to overemphasize it too much like evangelicals do. However, it is something, considering this is like the, let me think if I can remember, 40th anniversary of the 6-Day War.
50. 67.
67, you're right, 50-year anniversary of the 6-Day War. June 5th through the 10th, I believe, or 11th? 1967. Several Arab nations plotted to destroy Israel. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Iran. And you know what happened?
The Jews attacked first.
They completely failed. Do you know what the casualty amounts were in the Israeli army? In the hundreds. Do you know how many Arabs collectively died?
Thousands.
20 to 30,000. Israel don't play. They can't afford to. You know what they gained as a result of the 6-Day War? The Golan Heights, the West Bank, Sinai, the Gaza Strip, and later, as a result of the following the Yom Kippur War of 73, they gained control of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem became the capital of Israel for the first time since the days of Jesus. And it remains so to this day. This little tiny strip of land, smaller than New Jersey, is surrounded by enemies, and it's still alive to this day. I can't help but think that that's a sign. Think of it this way. Pretend New Jersey is its own country, and the rest of the United States is its enemy. That's what Israel lives with every single day. That's exactly what they live with every single day. I can't help but believe that God is behind that in some way. Can't help but believe that God is behind that in some way.
Weren't there some documented cases of like generals. I don't know if they were Jordanian or whatever they were, but they saw like legions of angels in armor and stuff.
I
And
have
they,
heard stories like
surrendered
that.
and, like, crazy stuff like that.
I have heard that. I've heard of Egyptian soldiers in the Sinai that were advancing. Well, the Israeli troops were coming forward, and then they stopped. And they basically surrendered because they felt that they were outnumbered. And the Israelis were like, what are you talking about? You have like several thousand men, and we have like only a couple. He says, are you kidding? We saw all of these others, and they stopped because they said, we're not going to go into this. This is a death trap. And they don't know what they're talking about. I've heard stories like that. I have heard stories like, not personal, but I mean, I've heard of them. And considering that Israel to this day is not a religious state, it's a secular state. They're not practicing as we would understand it, but somehow God has a plan. And out of the ashes, if you will, of the Holocaust came the phoenix of this whole country, this whole nation, where Jews can go from around the world to flee the persecution in other parts of the world. The only place that has more Jews in its borders is the United States. All other countries, their Jewish population has decreased because they've all immigrated. It's amazing. It's really astounding. And I can't help but think of the prophecies in the book of Ezekiel where God says, I will pull you from the nations back to your homeland. Yes, Robert?
Just to comment, current events also say that in France there's also an exodus of Jews leaving that because they don't feel safe with the influx of
Muslims, yes. Mm-hmm. Well, in general, Europe has been for some time in the throes of a new wave of anti-Semitism, not seen since the 1930s in Germany.
And they are going to Israel.
Yes, of course they will.
In the coming years.
Oh, yes. Israel and the United States are the only safe havens for Jews in the world. Which says something about our country. So anyway, we will get more into the Olivet Discourse as we progress, because we cannot, I've said this before, we cannot not neglect it because it is so intimately connected with eschatological events. We need to understand that. But with that review, let's go into chapter 7. That's chapter 6. Let's see what Revelation chapter 7 is. Now, one of the things that I don't think I mentioned before, I talked about the threefold judgments. Three sets of 7 judgments. We have 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. There's another additional structure that we're going to see as we move through this section between now until the end of the book, and that is this. I hate to erase this because I want to refer back to this, but I may need to shortly, so I hope someone wrote all this down. And that is this. In between each of the judgments, so you have the 7 seals, right? Seals 1 through 6 fall into succession. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then there appears to be what's called a parenthetical insertion. What does that mean? There's like a pause. It's like, and now a word from our sponsor. It's like a commercial in between the judgments. The whole world is falling apart. Now a word from our sponsor, And this happens in each of them. That there's this parenthetical expression, and then the 7th judgment is released, which opens, the 7th judgment opens the next set of judgments. So the 7th seal opens the 7 trumpets. That's its judgment. That's the 7th judgment. You get 7 more judgments. And when the trumpets are here, you have 1 through 6. You have a parenthetical phrase, and then you have 7, the 7th trumpet. And the 7th trumpet announces the 7 bowl judgments. Okay? Now, what are these parenthetical expressions? Why do we call them that? Because they don't seem to follow the order of events. They seem to be like an interlude or a commentary on something. So, for example, the war between Our Lady and the devil that's in Revelation 12, that's part of a parenthetical expression between the 6th and the 7th trumpet judgments. Okay? Now, what's interesting is that the 6th trumpet judgment, between the 6th and the 7th, is chapter 7 of the book of Revelation. Chapter 8 begins with the opening of the 7th seal and the beginning of the 7 trumpet judgments. When you get to the trumpet judgments, the parenthetical interlude lasts for 4 chapters. Chapters 10 all the way through chapter 14. Really, chapter 15. So there's like this bigger interlude in between the trumpet judgments than the bowl. The bowl judgments are in one chapter. There's a very small interlude, and then boom, you get into the whore of Babylon. So if you notice, these chapters are going very quickly. In fact, I have your next outline with you, which are the 7 angel trumpet judgments, which are chapters 8 and 9. So I'm hoping to finish chapter 7 tonight, maybe even start chapter 8 and get us into that. So here we go. So, chapter 6, verse 12 says, He opened the 6th seal. I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth, and the full moon became like blood. Remember that. We're going to come back to that when we get to the trumpet judgments. I'm not skipping it. It's an important expression. What does that mean? That the sky will be black and the moon will turn to blood. All right? Hold that thought. The sky vanished like a scroll. Every mountain and island was removed. The kings of the earth and the great men and the generals and the rich and the strong and every one, slave and free, hid in the caves and among the rocks and the mountains, calling to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the and from the great and terrible Lamb. Oh, I'm so scared. Right?